The vote for the bill was 313, which is what Seb and Kat. That's about what 37 or so short of a full complement of Tory votes. So, well, in that number, you have got a lot of abstentions, and if a few of those abstentions turn into no votes at the next time of significant asking in the new year, when it next comes up for a big yes or no, well, then the government is right back in very serious trouble. In the meantime, they've got, what do you call it, a breathing space, a moment of comparative calm.
A moment of relief, I think, is probably the best way to describe it, that this has been built up as a big moment, a risky moment, and Rishi Sunak has survived it, and they've got the second reading of that bill through, and I think ultimately the people who are behind this will be relieved by it. But as you said, John, this sets up for a lot of parliamentary action over the next month, just with the little thing of Christmas in the middle of it, but over that period to see where this goes next. But again, that number of abstentions, we're just waiting to get the full numbers through from the House of Commons, but that seems to roughly echo that group of so-called 5 families of right-wing Tories who've been meeting today, and they've gone for the abstentions, as they said, as opposed to actively all voting it down. But it's as we thought. It's going to be a tough couple of weeks ahead.
So it is. I mean, what's going to be going through the Prime Minister's mind this evening? I guess, first of all, clearly, relief. If you get to the point where government whips are threatening to take the whip away from Conservative MPs, the ultimate sanction, then you are in serious dread of losing a vote. And that did not happen. So, look, give them a moment for a breath of relief over that.
Well, especially having said it was not going to be a confidence vote last week, to then have this threat going around that the whip was going to be withdrawn and then be rescinded, and kind of all the sort of, I suppose, the kind of goodwill that gets eroded there, and the sense that who's really in charge. I understand from some people that they were summoned in to the chief whip this morning to have a conversation about whether they would be supporting the bill, and they had already told their whip that they were going to be supporting the bill and that there was not going to be any problem from them, and they weren't from a wing of the party that was particularly problematic, and just this sense that people don't seem to really know what's going on, and they don't really have a kind of full grip on things. To lose a bill at second reading is very unusual, very rare. So if they had have lost it at this stage, it would have been disastrous. The fact that they have got through to the third reading is obviously a cause for relief, but it shouldn't be seen as some great kind of celebration moment. This is the kind of bare minimum that you need to keep the show on the road. And that is why so many One Nation Tories, despite this kind of rhetoric and some of the measures in the bill going kind of fundamentally against their principles, were willing to hold their nose and vote for it to keep the show on the road.
Yes.
You kind of have to think that the work has got to start tomorrow, if not tonight, on shoring up the rest of the support and trying to do what they can to peel off as many different rebels as they can. So I thought it was quite interesting that the much vaunted emergency breakfast that was happening this morning was the New Conservatives. And then there were separate meetings with the ERG and others. I don't know whether it was a divide and conquer thing. I'm told that people think that might be putting too much faith into their ability to strategise. But certainly it would suggest that there are different sort of carrots and sticks being applied to try and encourage different kinds of people towards backing the bill. But the other thing is that, of course, because these are different groups, they have quite different kind of ideals and ambitions, and it's going to be very difficult to please all of those as well as the One Nations.
What can Rishi Sunak and his team and his whips do in this, slight breathing space, that space that's been granted to them, to try and make things a little easier when we resume battle after Christmas? Because if we pretty much agree there's very little that can be done by way of offering concessions of the kind the right wing want, but you've got to do something. I mean, what comes out of the whips and government ministers' bags of tricks? I mean, my mind, being the cynic that I am, drifts instantly towards promises of peerages and all sorts of goodies and honours and that sort of thing.
Well, they can't do another reshuffle before the election, so that's out.
I think ultimately it is going to have to be about the bill itself, right? It's going to have to be talking to Sir Bill Cash, who we've heard a lot from over the past couple of days, who's been involved in this, and see, is there any space for manoeuvre on that? Because we don't know those conversations and we don't know if there is any space. I think that's probably the first port of call, and now we'll see if there are ways they can amend and adjust that to get as many people on board as possible, because again, the numbers are starting to kick around on social media of abstentions, and it looks like, it could be as low as 30, could be as high as 45 from the moment. If it's at the lower end of that, then that would be better for the government, because there was talk of it being over 40, but people are still crunching the numbers at the moment. But ultimately in the future, I think the question is going to be, is there room for accommodation? Because I think this bill does need to pass. You know, the fact is that dealing with illegal migration is something that does matter a lot to voters. It matters particularly, based on the research we've done at Onward, my think tank, to those voters who voted Conservative in 2019, 4 years ago today, and are now in the don't know columns. They're not yet gone over to Labour, but they've not decided where to go. And to say to those voters, look, actually, you should trust the Conservatives again. They've got to have a clear, credible plan, and that starts with passing this bill.
Well, you know who you want to talk to when you're talking about how an issue plays in the country. You want to talk to a reliable pollster. So just as well, we have one of those on hand now. Let me welcome to Pino and friends Luke Tryl, who's the UK director of More in Common. Hello to you, Luke.
Good evening.
As well, your timing is perfect, Luke. We're talking about public opinion and how all of this plays with the people out there, away from the seething Westminster bubble. First of all, your headline thoughts on what you've been seeing this evening, Luke.
Well, on the one hand, clearly, the Prime Minister will be breathing a sigh of relief. In public opinion terms, no one likes to come across as a loser. And we know that when Theresa May lost that series of votes on the Brexit deal, that was what really eroded public confidence in her administration. On the other hand, and we've talked about this before, John, what we have seen over the past few days is a continuation of that sense of chaos, of a government that's not really in control of its own agenda. And if you think about the public and everything they've gone through, from Brexit to COVID to the cost of living crisis, we know what they're crying out for now is stable, quiet leadership. They want to be able to not turn on the news and worry about what they're going to see. And so I actually think, leaving aside immigration itself, the particularly damaging thing that comes out of the past few days is that sense that we're back to a governing party that is addicted to drama.
Well, I guess that's the first thought that occurs, Luke, isn't it? When you look at a drama like this unfolding, because it could have been catastrophic as it is. It's merely deeply embarrassing and damaging. The British public, from all the evidence that you look at all the time, they're not impressed by divisions in parties. And this has been the spectacle of a government which, yes, tonight has survived, but has been spending a large part of the day having what looked like an existential struggle. And out there, people are just not going to be impressed by that, which I would imagine makes the next set of polls, headline polls on the standing of the parties, maybe as soon as this weekend, very interesting, Luke.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting for a couple of reasons. One, because actually what's interesting over the past couple of weeks, what we seem to have seen is actually a bit of a dip in the Labour vote across a few different polls. It's down from some of the highs where it was just a few weeks ago. I wonder if we'll see that reverse now, because although I totally agree with Seb that immigration is an issue that really matters, particularly for those Conservative 2019 voters, I think what the public are going to take from all of this is, I still am struggling with the cost of my weekly shop. I still can't get a GP appointment, and the boats are still coming. And yet all that the politicians can do is argue amongst themselves. So I think that's the challenge. I guess the one good thing that the Conservatives can hope is that, their vote share looks to be at the moment about at its base. It's difficult to see it going much below kind of the mid-20s, and some of that chaos is almost kind of priced in public opinion. So what they'll be hoping is get this out of the way, come back to the new year, and just hope that as the economy starts to improve and tick up, maybe they get some sort of deal with the NHS workers, and this isn't quite as ugly as it seems like it might be in the new year over the Rwanda bill. That gives them the wind into that spring budget to start making the case to the electorate.
Yeah, well, I guess among that list will be, you will share that list with a lot of people in Downing Street as part of their wish list of things that they hope is going to work out. I want to share this with you now, just a bit of breaking news. A statement from Number 10 Downing Street. I'll read it to you. Tonight, the House has shown its support for the Prime Minister's legislation to deem Rwanda safe and stop the boats. This bill is the toughest legislation ever introduced to Parliament. It deems Rwanda safe, notwithstanding any other interpretation of international law. And it makes clear this Parliament, not any foreign court, is sovereign. Will now work, says Downing Street, to ensure this bill gets onto the statute book so we can get flights off to Rwanda and stop the boats. So Downing Street clearly making the most of the news. as good as far as it goes in the House of Commons from that vote this evening. Luke Tryl for More in Common, the pollster, is here with us. So Seb Payne and Kat Neelan. Seb.
I was just going to say, first of all, to talk in our earlier conversation about people marching up the hill and being more enthusiastic. Not a single Conservative MP voted against the bill tonight. We've just had those numbers out. So after all this talk of voting down the government and crashing it all, not a single MP actually voted against. So it's worth remembering that. But I just wanted to reflect on something Luke was saying about 2019 and when we think about that election. For me, the most potent advert the Conservatives ran was about politicians arguing about arguing. And they actually ran a party political broadcast that parodied this and said, you want to get Brexit done, to stop politicians arguing about this and to get on with your lives and do what matters. And ultimately, that's what I think the Conservative Party needs to think about again right now, because Luke is completely correct. Cost of living, NHS waiting list, small boats, in the work we do at Onward, and the same as More in Common, those are all the things that matter to people, and that's where the focus needs to be.
So Luke, on that, can you just, I don't know, give us a bit of a mental chart here of how migration figures in the list of priorities, to what extent it's capable of moving the dial, when it comes to voting time?
Well, so if you ask people about their top issues, number one is cost of living, and that won't surprise you. It's about 73% actually. It's a really whopping big number, say cost of living is the biggest issue facing the country. Then it's the NHS on about 40. And then third and fourth, usually tying each other, is levels of migration, about 25%, climate change, about the same. So it's an important issue. It's not quite as important as those first two. But when you break it down by those people that the Conservatives won in 2019, and they are, after all, the people that Rishi Sunak is going to be wanting to hold on to in the election we think will be next year, then immigration shoots up. Actually, it ties the NHS on about 40%. So it is an important issue. And it's an issue where, Labour do lead on immigration at the moment, which is quite extraordinary, given its traditional weakness for them. But it is closer. Labour have much bigger leads on who people trust in the NHS, who people trust on the issue of cost of living at the moment. So on migration, I think the feeling will be that's an issue where perhaps if we get some flights off next year, if this bill goes through, if some of the measures to deter or lower legal migration also work as well, then maybe that's an issue where they can claw back an advantage over the Conservatives. The difficulty is, we find this very often in our focus groups, is that people feel they've heard it all before. They think they've been promised this is now the third Rwanda bill of this parliament. And the danger is not only that they lose votes to the left, but that actually they start to lose more votes to parties like Reform UK on the right. And what we've seen in continental Europe sometimes is that when a centre-right party tries to play on immigration but doesn't meet voters' expectations, actually it's the populist right that benefit as well. Yeah. So they're not only going to talk a good game, they've got to make sure it works.